Okay, class, in this lesson we're going to continue with the two sources of morality and religion, looking deeper into this idea of the creative emotion that is central to open morality. And we're going to deal with the history of the evolution of morality as Bergson sees it, and how this progression, this evolution, leads to an open morality. So again, we have this idea of qualitative multiplicity that we saw in our previous lesson. The emotion, the creative emotion, is a qualitative multiplicity. It's a progressive development of the open morality, of the opening of the heart, as he says also. So it has these stages, and the stages are not, immobile states. They are not snapshots. They're not something that can be totally isolated from one another. They flow into each other, and they announce those that are going to come next, and they summarize the ones that came before. So they have this duration to them, as we've been talking about now. And very similar to the way in which the sentiment of grace and pity worked, developing from stage to stage. So here we start with a feeling, and the feeling is that our maxims are failing, that we can't use any of our logical, conceptual, social ego, socially conditioned obligations, duties, things like that. Those fail us. And what we feel in that moment is that we need to look to a higher calling. What it is we hear this kind of echo of the voices of charity, of agape, the model of Christ, or my mother for me, or Martin Luther King. These figures who they needed to advance beyond what society could give them in terms of ready-made concepts. So they took this leap ahead, and we feel the need to do this as well. So it's not this model that we can just merely emulate. It's not as if we know, because that would just get us back to maxims, right? It reminds us of something that we already know implicitly, something that we felt that we should have been striving for, some kind of good that needed to be done, some kind of, it's not even duty, it's higher than duty, it's charity, right? We are attracted to charity, and agape, charity sounds like going out and just serving soup to the poor. That is charity, and that is agape. But it's not just that. It's this unconditional love of humanity, right? That's what agape gets at. It's this love of others as if we were God. So if God loves the creature, we love the creature in the same way that God loves the creature. That's what agape is. Creature being the created, right? So that's the first moment in the evolution of the creative emotion. We feel this awakening in us of the echo of those voices of absolute justice, of charity, of progressing humanity forward. So that's the first part of it. Then we submit ourselves to this feeling, and this is necessary. If we don't do this, we'll never actually have the creative emotion. So it's possible to kind of be stunted at that first moment. You can hear that, but then the ego can come back in, social ego, or the intellectual ego, where we pursue our self-interest. But if that doesn't happen, if we don't submit to that, and we do submit to this feeling, this call, the higher calling, then we relinquish the social ego. We feel that its desires and its wills are repugnant to a higher calling, that they are contrary to what we know we should aspire towards. So after this submission, there's a kind of effort required. We can't just say, dang, I really do think that we should all be, helping each other, working to bring about justice to these people who are suffering or something like that. But what needs to happen is there needs to be an effort. We need to exert an effort and see it through. We have to bring this into existence. It requires that we innovate. So again, we can look to an example that Bergson gives, the Joan of Arc, or somebody like Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa or something like that. As soon as they feel, or Gandhi, they feel this need, and then the effort comes in, and what the effort does is it means that they immediately go out and they immediately do something. So Mother Teresa just feels this rapture, and then the next day goes out and starts feeding the poor. Or whatever they do, the mission immediately starts. So there's no hesitation there. The effort just, it requires a lot of effort, of course, and a lot of innovation and thinking, what am I going to do in order to help? Or what am I going to do in order to bring this about? And seeing that through, that is the moment when the creative emotion is stamped into reality, when it becomes a part of the evolution and propelling of humanity forward. So Bergson, again, he connects this creative emotion and the open morality to the morality of the Gospels. And Bergson was Jewish. He was raised Jewish and was Jewish through until on his deathbed he actually converted to Christianity. So we must imagine that he had these ideas bubbling up in him for a long time. It's speculated that he didn't convert earlier because of the rampant anti-Semitism that had been going not only through France but especially in Germany, as we know. So he waited to convert probably for those reasons, but he does also talk extremely positively of Judaism and the justice, this feeling of the need of justice in the Old Testament, although he also criticizes it, saying that it was too focused on the people of Israel as the chosen people, because they were the chosen people in opposition to other people. It's in Christianity that it becomes universalized, or it becomes an opening of the heart to all people, right? And even beyond people for Bergson, caring for creation itself. So the morality of the Gospels for Bergson advances beyond the kind of closure of the Old Testament. It's an opening of morality, an opening of the soul, an opening of the heart. And it requires an enthusiasm. And that word, etymologically, thusi, means spirit or divination. It's related even to this like daimon almost of the Greek. So enthusiasm means to be, possessed almost by the divine spirit, or inspiration, to have the spirit within you, the living spirit within you, or the Holy Spirit. And it involves that the spirit here is not just entering in and there's no change, but no, when that happens, there's a transition and a progress that pushes humanity forward. So he says, what does he say about Christianity? He says that it's a kind of disposition that we need to get into. It's a kind of attitude rather than maxims or laws. He says that the maxims and the laws that Christ gives, the Sermon on the Mount, riddled with paradoxes almost. Blessed are the poor and in spirit, because they're the ones who become blessed, right? And these kinds of paradoxes. So he says, They border on paradox and even on contradiction in their more definite admonitions. If riches are an evil, should we not be injuring the poor by giving them what we possess? So if charity consists in giving the poor things, riches, whether it's food or housing or things like that, aren't we making them worse by giving them these things? So this is a kind of paradoxical side of it. If he who has been smitten on one cheek is to offer the other, what becomes of justice? So if we're saying, turn the other cheek, wouldn't that be a destruction of justice? Wouldn't we say no one should ever be punished for harming other people? So another kind of contradiction or paradox that seems to emerge. And without justice, how can there be charity? So if we don't judge certain people to need charity, to need, helping the poor and things like that, if we can't calculate that to some degree, then there's no possibility that we could ever do that, bring them those goods. But he says that this paradox or contradiction is really only an apparent one. It's one that arises when we look at them and address them by the intellect, rather than feeling the creative emotion behind them, feeling the intent that enlivens them, the life behind it. And the life behind it is to create a disposition of the soul. It's to inspire a way of looking at things rather than prescribing and pressuring the soul in a certain way. The act by which the soul opens and broadens and raises itself to a pure spirituality, of a morality, not a morality enclosed and materialized in ready-made rules, but one which is advancing and evolving and moving beyond and aspiring towards something new. So he says that the latter then becomes, the latter being the closed form of morality, something like snapshots of movement. And this is, again, this idea of immobility versus mobility and the cinematic mechanism of the intellect. We cut up the moments of the evolution of morality, and we pretend that each one is a self-sustained individual unit or concept, rather than seeing the life that breathes through the process as the essence of morality. So Bergson says that there are two forms of justice, basically. There's a relative justice, born of a closed morality, born of social pressure, and then there's an absolute form of justice. So the relative form of justice is kind of this eye for an eye. This morality is directly connected to what David Graeber, if you were in the previous semester of my course, identifies with the logic of exchange. And this is deeply rooted too in Plato's Republic, who Graeber is clearly influenced by. When exchange emerged in societies, we used that logic of, I can trade you, instead of trading you 4 potatoes for a pig or something like that, it would probably be more than 4 potatoes, whatever. Instead of bartering, let's use money to exchange goods. All of a sudden, money is this emblem of equity, equality between people, and suddenly we can measure what is due. So we apply that to morality, and we attempt this kind of judicial form of morality, where once something is already done, we then appraise it and try to say what its quantity is in terms of retribution, right? Retributive justice here. Absolute justice, on the other hand, is a vision of humanity which says that there's an incommensurability of human life. It is something incalculable and immeasurable. There's nothing we can use to kind of retributionally, you know, appraise our human relationships. So it's something that arises when maxims break down, when the pre-existing concepts don't work. It's when a creative emotion is required. We aspire to charity. That's the higher form of justice. That's the justice of turn the other cheek. That's the justice of the Gospels for Bergson. So what's really key here is that philosophy is not the source of justice and morality. If philosophy is something connected with the use of concepts or with logic and things like that, forming ideas, coming to clear ideas about things, that is not the source of morality and justice. It's an emotion and it's an aspiration. So Bergson goes through the history of the evolution of morality, and Aristotle and the Greeks in general, he is very critical of them. So while Aristotle does kind of outline a practical form of justice, it's a completely closed morality. And the Greeks couldn't even imagine the abolition of slavery or of extending this form of justice beyond the city walls. So law, equality, the rights of citizens, these things, it was a very closed form of morality. It was only men, only free men, and it didn't extend beyond the city. It wasn't extended to women. It wasn't extended to the enslaved. So what he says they did was that they had a sense of this. Like Plato has the idea of humanity, which is has a kind of dignity to it, deserving of education and being treated with charity and things like that. We can even read Socrates as kind of living that out to some degree. But they didn't see it through. They didn't follow it through. They lacked that effort necessary to try and bring it about, or at least even to intimate how it could be brought about. So what they did is they substituted this true justice, this kind of universal republic, universal citizenry of humanity itself. They substituted that for a closed society. And he thinks that the Stoics were the first to really preach a kind of universal justice. And actually, the Stoics, the influence of Stoicism in the Roman Empire was part of the reason that Christianity had a kind of smooth transition, because there were ideas in Stoicism that were very amiable or accepting of the Christian ideas. This, in part, being this kind of universal justice, a kind of cosmopolitanism of the good of humanity as such. Now, he doesn't think that Stoicism actually brought this about or was able to propagate it. And he says, Marcus Aurelius was a emperor of Rome, and he couldn't see the need to abolish slavery. So how could he possibly have really grasped the open morality? He couldn't, basically. So it wasn't until Christianity that an open morality was realized and became capable of being spread, being propagated. He uses this word propaganda, and it's not the way we use that word. Propaganda would just be the things that make possible a propagation. So how do we propagate? How do we spread this feeling of universal love, this open morality, this aspiration? Christianity was the first real, propagatable, spreadable inspiration towards open morality for Bergson. Morality evolves with Christianity, but even Kant, who is a kind of absolute crystallizing of Christianity into a rational system. Kant basically boils down the Christian morality into a logical system which can propagate. That's or not propagate, but which can that's definitely not the right word, because it's not an inspiration, it is a pressure. And so that's the problem. What Kant does is he reduces it to a system of duty, which is a system of pressure. So while Kant does have morality that is not reducible to practical interest, it's not reducible to our ego drive, right? It's not reducible to our social ego or to our pursuit of happiness or things like that. It is something wholly static, and it pretends as if it's always the way that it is. So really, at the heart of Kant's misconception is that he thinks that the will is rational and that duty is based on a rational sentiment. Bergson completely denies this. He thinks that there's no instances where that's really what happens. He says duty is not the source of morality, but it is an effect of morality. Bergson describes this in terms of a resistance to a resistance, as I'll describe in a minute. What duty says is that you must because you must. So duty has this kind of circular logic to it. And Bergson says, no, if that's how we define duty, the only thing that is truly duty in that case would be instinct. And as we know, instinct is not duty. Duty is what arises in obligation. And obligation is the reconnecting back after our instinct has failed, essentially, right? So instinct would have us just following out all of our social conditioned pressure to, cohere with society. Then all of a sudden we would arise this feeling that we can do something else, that this necessity can be broken. And in that moment, we feel a resistance to the resistance. This is the idea of duty. So basically the idea is you're laying in bed in the morning, you wake up and you think, I do not want to get out of bed today and go to class. Not that anyone's going to class right now because of COVID, but think back to waking up to go to school in your past. So there's a resistance. You know that you need to do it. You know that you should do it. You know that it's part of your socially conditioned self. But you're resisting. Duty comes in as a resistance to the resistance. And basically the problem here is this rational? Is this logical? Or is it an emotion? And what Bergson says basically is that, well, we will start giving ourselves reasons. We'll say, if I don't get good sleep, then I can't actually do my work well. So if I go to school, I'm actually selling short society or my schooling in some way. So it would be better if I actually just stayed here. So we start giving ourselves these reasons. And then we'll give ourselves other reasons that resist those reasons. Well, even if I'm not doing well, at least I'm, not getting in trouble by not going to school. Whatever. We give reasons on top of reasons on top of reasons. And Bergson is basically saying that it's not the logic of these reasons. It's not whether or not we can deduce a perfectly sound argument. What ultimately makes the decision is an emotional state, a feeling. So he really just throws out this idea that duty is what is at stake here. And duty, of course, defined by Kant, is a kind of logical coherence. I lie because I desire something, but I don't lie even when I desire something because reason tells me that I shouldn't lie. Bergson thinks that that's ridiculous. It's always an emotional state that determines it. And this idea that it's a rational sentiment is besides the point for Bergson. So the source of morality is not reason, it's not logic, it's not intellectual exercise. It's pre-personal, infrarational. What does that mean? It's pre-personal because it's this thing that has been inculcated in us, right? It's this pressure of society that we all feel in a kind of impersonal way. And it's infrarational. Infra means under. It's infrarational. It's pre-rational. It's under the rational because it's an emotion. And so Kant is obsessed with the individual and the individual's rational reflections. Lying. How does lying have a kind of duty to it? So he's all about individual duty and this kind of rational expression of it. But Bergson is interested in society, in our interconnection with other people. And rather than being kind of like obsessed with how do we evaluate something and how do we rationally conceive it, he's saying how do we understand society being propelled forward, and how is there an evolution, and how is there a change in society, a progression into novelty. So Bergson does have some aspects that are kind of Kantian, and he is kind of taking up certain ideas of Kant, but he's most certainly going against Kant and trying to shift the focus beyond what Kant, how Kant defines morality. Really quick, we'll just look at Mill here. Mill is like a classic example of closed morality. It's a form of intellectualism. It's all about calculation and seeing how we can like bring about certain outcomes based on our concepts. And basically you take the social ego, you take the societal form, and you calculate how to bring about that form in the most efficient way. Supremely practical form of morality. If you take Mill and Kant, maybe, and like put them together, you get the most advanced form of closed morality. Closed morality can't get any further than that, more or less. It's a relative form of justice, and it's a mere approximation of morality. So what we need is a further evolution of morality. We need to continue this progress. And there's an unforeseeable advance that we don't even know about yet. What is the higher form of morality that sits on the horizon of our future? So Bergson really does privilege Christianity and Christian mysticism. Again, Christian mysticism for Bergson is not just this enthusiastic rapture of being, held by the divine presence or something like that. It involves that, but it's more importantly a propelling of society forward. So what does this mean? So while there's a privileging of Christianity, it implies that there's a new religion that we cannot yet foresee. And it's not Bergsonism. It's not Bergsonian morality or Bergsonian religion by any means. And Bergson never thought it would be that. It's something beyond what we can perceive yet. It's something beyond what we can foresee. So there's this religion of the future, just as there is new genres of art and music that we don't know about yet. Can't wait to hear what they sound like, but we don't know yet. You can imagine in like the 1950s being completely unable to predict the Beatles or something like that, or in the 60s being completely unable to foresee funk music or something like that. Now, of course, they're based on elements that came before them. The Beatles have blues and folk and those kinds of elements in them. Funk has R&B and things like that. They do have resemblances to what came before, but they are new forms. They're novel. They go beyond. No one could have felt the things that they feel when listening to those prior to them. So there's this question nowadays. I mean, this is way less of a thing at Boston College, but my undergrad was at Penn State, and at Penn State, the average student is not probably Christian, or if they are Christian, it's extremely vaguely Christian. Like my professor at Penn State, who taught me this book, the Two Sources of Morality and Religion, he remarked a lot about how when he teaches Kant or teaches Bergson and things like that to his students, his undergrad students, oftentimes students have no idea, what is the Sermon on the Mount, what is happening in that, and like these things. People don't have these kind of like Christian ideas in the back of their head. So we've moved into a post-Christian society in some ways, and what does that mean? What it means is that Christianity is not a kind of baseline thought behind our moral understanding as much as it used to be. And so the question is this good or bad? Well, on the one hand, Bergson, of course, privileges Christianity, but there's a sense in which he might have actually thought it was a good thing. Why? Well, as soon as we loosen the ties, of course, there's an extremely superficial version of Christianity which we get caught up in, which is not the Christianity of the mystics. The mystic is a very rare form of Christianity, and there's a lot to be said for the idea that Christianity has gotten to a point where it has kind of ruled out really treating the Gospels in their transformative, evolutionary form. So the fact that Christianity is breaking down could potentially be a good thing. It makes it possible that this unforeseeable advance could come about. That would take incredible amount of inspiration and enthusiasm among people, moving us in that direction. So a calling, a higher calling. So to finish up here, I just want to kind of outline Bergson's philosophy. So the two sources of morality are intimately linked to the two tendencies that we've already seen, the relative and the absolute, the two tendencies of thought towards analysis on the one hand, logic, science, these things, and on the other hand towards intuition, grasping the concrete. Again, the relative is an imitation, it's a replacement, it's something exterior, it's a translation. It's not reality, it's an imitation of reality. The absolute, again, is the concrete complexity of our experience, which is something durational and which is evolving. It's something that can't be reduced to quantities and to concepts and external representations. So on these two tendencies, these two different categories, we have the relative, which is a form of pressure, the social ego, our habits. They become automatic. Laws are things that are laid down and never changing. Closed systems, static representations of things, geometrical space, and the reversibility of equations that we find in reductionist science, which, by the way, has been completely disproven nowadays. But we still assume that this scientific attitude that the intellect can grasp things that are completely reversible and that are existing in a geometric space in which everything is clear and distinct, in this kind of presence to consciousness model. The intellect works by connecting to fixed entities, to immobilities. It expects a repetition of the same. It demands that things be foreseeable. It looks always for mechanisms in which there's necessity. And all this worldview ever gets is entropy and decay. You have energy distributed, and eventually it's all going to turn into a complete equilibrium of decay, and it leads to the kind of intellectual validation of a closed society. On the other hand, we have aspiration, we have creative emotions, these complex feelings that evolve and progress. And at the heart of that is a feeling of love. A love for humanity, a love for God, a love for other people as if we were God loving humanity. And with this, we have open systems and dynamics rather than the closed systems that treat things as if they're just molecules and things bumping into each other. We see something dynamic and evolutionary and open systems. And rather than treating things as if they were in geometrical space and by reversible kind of static models, we have to look at things in terms of a qualitative change and irreversibility of progress from moment to moment into the future. And mobility takes the center stage, and novelty and creation, rather than repetition of the same and going back and make America great again, things like that. No, we need novelty, creation. We need to move forward. We need to bring about a new society. Rather than instead of mechanisms and seeing everything as just mechanisms, we look for the intentionality and this interiority of things. So, if science says that life is just molecules being bumped around, but you look at your cat or your dog and say, no, there's like a life inside there. There's an interior intentionality. That's where the absolute reality of life is. It's not in this kind of reconstruction of the thing, dealing with it in terms of things we've cut up and dissected. And so instead of looking at reality in terms of entropy and decay, we look for organization and evolution and movement forward, creation of new organizations. So not just organization as something already brought about, but something that is a progress and something created. And that's the idea of an open society as well. How can we progress society beyond what we have? How can we extend the protection of all people and of nature and of the environment and things like that? How can we expand society and go forward and create a better world?